In this tutorial, I will show you how to create this sci-fi alien orb looping animation using geometry nodes in Blender. So the modeling of the sci-fi orb will be created completely with geometry nodes, and then also the materials on the sci-fi orb are going to be procedural. And then we are going to make this a looping animation, so after we create the sci-fi alien orb, we're going to animate it spinning and animate it bobbing up and down, and then we will render out the frames and compile it into Blender's video editor and add some sound effects and make it a looping animation. And I'm going to be using the Eevee rendering engine for this tutorial, but you could definitely use the Cycles rendering engine. Cycles will work great as well. And if you'd like to help support this channel and purchase the tutorial files, then you can do that on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page with the links in the description. And then also before we start, I wanted to let you know about the Physical Starlight and Atmosphere Blender add-on. Physical Starlight and Atmosphere is an amazing Blender add-on for creating realistic skies and sky lighting. I've used the add-on myself and I highly recommend it. You can customize the sun, atmosphere, stars, clouds, fog, and more. The add-on also provides some outstanding sky presets, such as daytime and sunset, fog and haze, Mars, and even retrowave. You can also change the time of day just by rotating the sunlight. Check out the add-on with the link in the description, and by purchasing the add-on through my link, you'll be helping to support this channel. Now, as I mentioned, all of the materials are going to be procedural in Blender, but I am going to be using this Skylit Garage HDRI from polyhaven.com, and I'm going to be downloading the 1K version and the HDR version. So link will be in the description if you'd like to download this, and I'm going to be using this to get some nice realistic lighting and reflections in the scene. And then if you want to add the sound effects that I'm going to be using when we're video editing this together, then I'm going to be using this Alien Hums, and this is a free sound effect from freesound.org, and you can see it's licensed as Creative Commons 0. And then as well as that, I'm also going to be downloading this force field ambience, and so we'll be adding this in with the animation when we're video editing it together to get some cool sci-fi alien sound effects. So link will be in the description if you'd like to download those sound effects. Alright, so here we are in Blender, and if you want to see my screencast keys, they're going to be right down here in the corner so you can see what buttons I'm pressing. And then I'm also going to be using the Node Wrangler add-on in this tutorial, so if you don't have the Node Wrangler add-on enabled, you can click on Edit, and then you can go here to the Preferences, and then over there in the Add-ons tab, you can search for Node Wrangler and just checkmark the Node Wrangler add-on, and I'll show you how to use it in the video. Alright, so the first thing that I'm going to do is press the A key to select everything, and let's click on delete. So I'm now going to press Shift A, and we're just going to add a cube. You can just add any object because we're going to be replacing it for geometry nodes, but we do just need some basic object. So I now want to split the window so that we can see the geometry node editor. So I'm going to move my mouse right up here into the corner when there's the crosshair, and then I can click and drag out, and that is going to split the window. And then you can click on this button right here to change the editor type, and let's change it to the geometry node editor. And I can click and drag and get rid of this, and let's also make this a bit smaller. So then with this object selected, you can click on new to add new geometry nodes. Now you can select the group input, and I'm not actually going to be using it, so I can hit X to delete it. I'm going to instead press Shift A, and then I'm going to hit the S key, and that's going to take me to the search. And I'm going to search for an icosphere. So Blender's geometry nodes actually has different nodes for primitive shapes or primitive objects like the icosphere. And then I want to pull out a wire from the mesh, and I want to put that into the geometry so that I can actually preview the icosphere. And then let's take the subdivisions here, and we're going to turn that up to 2. And then we should also save this Blender file. So I'm going to click right up here on File, and I'll click on Save As. And I'll just save this as sci-fi orb.blend in a folder with my other files, and I'll click on Save As. And then you can press Ctrl S, and that'll save the Blender file. So as you're working on the project, you can just press Ctrl S every now and then. Now to make this look really cool in Sci-Fi, I want to extrude out the faces. So I'm going to press Shift A, and then let's hit S to go to the search, and I'm going to search for extrude, and we want to add the extrude mesh node, and I'm going to put that right here in between the icosphere and the group output. And then I need to zoom out here. So you can see, because this is set to faces here, now if I change this offset scale, I can drag the offset scale, and you can see that's going to change how much it's being extruded. And there also are some other things here like edges and also vertices, but I want to keep it to faces because I want to extrude the faces. And there's also individual right here, and I do want that to be turned on, and this way it's going to extrude each face individually. Now instead of just using a single value, I want to make each face be extruded individually, so that some faces are extruded out more and other faces are extruded out less. So to do this, I'm going to press Shift A, and let's hit S for the search, and I'm going to search for a random value node. Let's click on this and bring it down here, and then I can put the value into the offset scale. And so this way the random value is generating random values for each face. So each face is going to be extruded randomly. So now we have this really cool look right here. Now there's also a minimum value and a maximum value, so you can kind of control the threshold of how much each face is being extruded. So you can just play around with these values and get it to how you like. I'm going to turn my minimum here to a 0.07, just a 0.07. And then you can also change the maximum, and I do want to make that smaller, and I'm going to go with a value of 0.15, so just 0.15. So they're not being extruded out that much, but some are a little bit more extruded out than others. But you could of course play around with this. If you want them to be bumping out a lot more, you could turn that maximum up. Now I want to add sort of like a bevel effect right here in the faces. So I'm going to click on this extrude mesh node, and I'm going to press Shift D to duplicate it, and let's just drop it right here. And you can see that it's extruding it out again, and so it looks really weird. So there's a few things that I want to do here to fix this. So I'm going to uncheck the individual, and that way it's not going to extrude out each face individually. And then also I want it to just extrude out the sides instead. So I can take the side value right here, and I'm going to put that into the selection. So we're putting that data into the selection. So I'm now going to turn the offset scale up, and you can see that it is extruding out the sides. Now the problem with this is that because it's extruding out the sides, it's actually pushing it out, and so now it's overlapping. So I need to scale these to make them smaller. So I'm going to press Shift A, and then let's hit S for the search, and I'm going to search for the scale elements node. Let's click on this, and I'm going to drop it right here. And then we want to scale the sides, so let's click on the side, and we're going to put that into the selection. So I can now play around with this scale right here, and you can see that I can scale down the sides. And when we scale down the sides, now it's giving us that really cool beveled look. So now you can play around with the offset scale, and you can also play around with this scale value here. And on the second extrude mesh, I'm going to go with a value of 0.03, so just a 0.03 for the offset scale. And then right here on the scale elements node, I want the scale value to be different on each triangle. So what I'm going to do is take this random value node, and I'm going to press Shift D to duplicate it and drop it here. And then let's take the value, and I'm going to put that into the scale. So I can now change the minimum and the maximum, and you can see now they're kind of random. So this one is a bit smaller, whereas this one is a bit bigger. So on the random value minimum, I'm going to turn this to a value of -0.29. That's what I found to work well. And then on the maximum here, I'm going to turn this to a 1.07. I find that a 1.07 is pretty good, so that some of them are much bigger. But you can of course play around with the maximum value. You can also hold down the Shift key as you drag this to make your movements more sensitive. Now I want to smooth out the edges and make it a bit round. So to do this, I'm going to press Shift A. Let's hit S for the search, and I'm going to search for the subdivision surface node. Let's click on the subdivision surface node, and I'm going to drop this after the scale elements. So this is going to actually subdivide the mesh. Now on the levels here, I'm just going to turn this up to 4 so that it is pretty subdivided. And then you can also play around with this edge crease to crease the edges, because I do want to make it more sharp. I do want it to look much more like how it was before, and so I want to crease the edges, not too much, but I do want to crease them a little bit. And I'm going to turn the edge crease on the subdivision surface to a 0.521, so a 0.521. So now you can see that it is pretty sharp, but just the edges there are a little bit smooth and round. And then I also want to shade the object smooth because you can see it still is kind of blocky. So I can press Shift A, hit S for the search, and I can search for shade smooth. And I want to add the set shade smooth node, and we can put this after the subdivision surface. And there we go. So it is now shaded smooth. Now later in this video, we're going to be making the materials. And so I want most of the object to be a metal material, but then right here in the cracks, I want to have a little bit of a glowing material. And so to do this, I'm actually going to go back here to this icosphere, and I'm going to press Shift D to duplicate it, and I'm going to bring it much closer. And then this icosphere, I'm going to join with the rest of the geometry, but we'll scale it up just a tiny little bit so it'll be kind of peeking through the edges. So let's press Shift A. I can go here to the search, and I'm going to search for the join geometry node because we want to join multiple geometry together. So let's click on this, and then I can just drop it right here after the set shade smooth. And then I can take this icosphere, and let's take the mesh, and I'm going to put that into the geometry. Now you can see that nothing really happened, but that's because this icosphere is the same size as the other icosphere. So I can just turn the radius up just a little bit, and you can see as I turn it up, it's just going to poke through the little creases there. So I'm going to turn the radius to a 1.01, so just a 1.01, so it's just a little bit bigger, and now you can see it's just kind of peeking through the edges. Alright, so we are almost ready to make the procedural materials, but before I do the materials, I do want to set up the lighting so that we actually have some nice lighting to preview the materials. So what I'm going to do is make this much smaller, and I'm going to work a little bit here in the 3D space. So I want to add a camera, so let's press Shift A, and I'm going to go right down here and add a camera. And then you can just navigate to where you want the camera to be. I'm going to press 1 on the numpad so that I'm looking at the front view, and then I'm just going to kind of look slightly down at the sphere here. And then I can press Control Alt numpad 0, and Control Alt numpad 0 is going to bring the camera to where we are. Now I want to make this be a square image, so if you open up this side panel here and click over here on the output properties, I'm going to make the resolution X and Y the same. So on the Y resolution right here, I'm going to turn this to 2560 by 2560. This is a pretty large image, so you definitely don't need to make it that big. You could just do like 1920 by 1920, but I want it to be a square image and pretty large. And then if you just click right here in the corner to select the camera, you can press G to grab and you can move the camera around. You can also press G to grab, and then you can double tap the Z key, and that's going to bring the camera in and out. So I'm going to bring it out a little bit. And then I also want to turn the focal length up of the camera just so that everything looks a little bit more flat. So if you click right over here to go to the object data properties of the camera, make sure you have the camera selected so you can see that. You can see right here there is focal length. So if you turn the focal length up, it's going to zoom in a little bit and it will look a little bit more flat. So I'm going to turn the focal length up to 80. I think that looks good. And then I can press G to grab and then double tap the Z key, and I can just bring this out a little bit and place it there. All right, and then let's also click right over here to go to the render properties, and right here on the render engine, I did mention that I was going to be using Blender Eevee, so I will just change this over to Blender Eevee because we're going to be setting up the lighting and the materials now. But if you wanted to use cycles, if you wanted it to look more realistic, you could definitely use cycles, but I will be using Blender Eevee. Now when you change this to Eevee, there are some important settings that you can turn on to make Eevee look more realistic. So I'm going to check mark the ambient occlusion and the bloom and also the screen space reflections, and then I'm also going to be check marking the motion blur because when we animate this I do want a little bit of motion blur. And then we can also scroll right down here and we can open up the color management, and I'm going to leave the view transform to filmic, but then I'm going to take the look here and I'm going to turn this to high contrast, and this is going to make things more contrasty and it'll make the colors more saturated and make the image look nicer. Alright, so I can hold down the Z button and I can move my mouse up to the rendered view so we can preview what this looks like in the rendered view. Now I want to add in the HDRI lighting that I mentioned at the beginning of the video. So to add this in, I can click right over here to go to the world properties. And then you can see right here on color, there's this little yellow dot. So I'm going to click on this and then I can change this to environment texture. And then let's click on open here to open up the HDRI. So again, link is in the description if you'd like to download the same HDRI that I'm using from Polyhaven. So I'm just going to double click on this to open it up. And this is going to give us some nice realistic lighting and reflections. Now I actually want it to be pretty dark, so let's take the strength value here, and I'm just going to turn that down to like a 0.1. And so now it is very dark, but it will still give some nice reflections on the metal. So now I want to add some lights before we create the materials. So to make the lights, I'm going to press Shift A, and I'm going to go down here to light, and I'm going to add an area light. And so I'm first going to add some rim lights kind of in the background, pointed out the mesh, and it's going to pop out the mesh from the background and show the shape a bit better. So I'm going to bring this light back, and I can press R to rotate. Let's just rotate this over and bring it over here to the side. And then with the light selected, if you click right over here to the object data properties, right here on the shape, I want to click on this, and I'm going to change this to a rectangle. And then I want to take the size X, and I want to drag this out so it is much longer. And I can also rotate it up a bit. I can also double tap the R key to enable the trackball rotation and kind of rotate this over. And then I do want to make the power much stronger so it is a lot brighter. And it might be better to go into the camera view, so you can press the 0 on the numpad to go into the camera view. And I want this light to be very bright, so I'm going to turn the power here to 1600. And you can also play around with the size X and the size Y. And then on the color here, I want to make this kind of like an aqua greenish bluish color. So I'm going to bring it over to a color kind of like that. Maybe scale this down and rotate it over. So I now want to add 2 more rim lights. So with this light selected, I can press Shift D to duplicate. Let's press 7 on the numpad. That's going to take me to top view, and I can rotate the light over. So press R to rotate. Bring this over, and then if I go over here to the side, I could also rotate this over like this. All right, something like that. So we kind of have another rim light there, and then I want to have 1 more rim light on the bottom. So I can press Shift D to duplicate, and then I can navigate over here to the side, rotate it up. And then if I kind of go here to the front, I can rotate that over. And you can also double tap the R key to enable the trackball rotation. All right, so let's stick that right there so it's pointed right up there. So now we have 3 rim lights, and they're kind of like a triangle shape around the object, and they're giving this really cool kind of greenish alien sci-fi light. So I now want to add 2 more main lights. So I'm just going to click on one of these lights here, and I want to put another light kind of right here pointed down on the front. So I'm going to press Shift D to duplicate. Let's bring this up here. And if I press 7 on the numpad for top view, I can rotate this over and just point it at the object. And then right here, let's click on the shape, and I want to change this instead back to square. And then I can kind of scale it, and I want to make it pretty big, but not that big. And then if I click right here on the color, this color, I want to make much more of a blue color. So bring it a bit more towards the blue and a bit more white. So something like that. So we now have some nice bright lighting shining on the object, and it does look a bit blown out. You can see how white that is, but once we add the dark metal material, it won't look as blown out. So I can now press Shift D to duplicate this, and I'm just going to add 1 more light. So I'll bring this down here and rotate it over, and this one's kind of going to be underneath the object, and it's going to rotate up and be pointed at the object like that. And this one here, if I click on the color, I want to make this kind of a darker blue, so something like that. And then I also want to make it a bit darker because you can see it is pretty strong. So let's turn the power here just to like 400. So it's not quite as bright, but you can see it's adding some nice blue lighting. All right, there we go. So we now have some pretty nice lighting for the object. So I can click back on the object, and I'm going to click and drag right here to make this bigger, and we can now do the materials. So I need to bring up the shader editor. So I'm going to bring up my mouse into the corner when the crosshair appears, and I can click and drag down to split this window. And then if we click right here to change the editor type, I'm going to change this to the shader editor. And then with the object selected, you can click on new to add a new material, and I can just rename the material to a metal. And then let's take the base color, and for now I'm just going to make it darker. Now you can see that I'm making this darker, but it's not actually affecting the object, and that's because in the geometry nodes we need to tell what parts of the mesh we want to actually be this color. So I'm going to click and drag and make the geometry nodes bigger. And if I zoom in here, I want to go right here to where the join geometry is. And I'm going to press Shift A. Let's go to the search. and I'm going to search for the set material node. So we can click on the set material node, and I want to stick it right after the set shade smooth. And then if I click on this drop down right here, I can click on the metal. So this node is telling it that all the geometry before it is going to be that metal material. And then we will also be adding another emission material in there for the cracks, but we will do that later. So I'm going to click and drag and make this smaller so I can see the shader editor. So now let's create the procedural metal material. So I'm going to take the metallic value here on the principled shader, and I'm going to turn this up all the way to 1 so it is actually a metallic material. And then I also want to add some noise to the roughness. So I'm going to press Shift A. Let's go here to the search, and I'm going to search for the noise texture. Let's click on this and I can drop it here. And then we turned on the Node Wrangler add-on earlier in the video, so I can hold down the Control and Shift key and then select the noise texture, and that is going to preview the texture on the object. Now also with this noise texture selected, I'm going to press Control T, and that's using a feature of the Node Wrangler, and it's going to add the texture coordinate and mapping, and we don't actually need the mapping, so I can select it and then press X to delete it. And let's take the object and we're going to put that into the vector. And by using the object coordinates, it's going to place the texture on the object more evenly. Now I want this noise texture to be very detailed, so let's turn the detail all the way to the max of 15. And then I can take the factor and we're going to put that into the roughness, and then I can hold down the Control and Shift key and select the principled shader. Now I want to play around with the roughness values, so I can press Shift A. Let's go to the search, and I'm going to search for a color ramp. Let's put the color ramp node after the noise texture, and so we can now change the colors of the color ramp, and that'll change how shiny the metal is. So I'm first going to click on this black tab here and click on the color, and I'm just going to turn this up a little bit, so it's still going to be very, very dark, but it'll just be a very dark gray. And the hex value that I'll be using is 0D, 0D, 0D. So if you want to use the exact same color that I'm using, then you can punch in that hex value. And then let's also click on the white tab, and I want to drag the white tab out to make it a bit more contrasty, but then I want to click on this white tab here, and I'm going to make it a bit darker so it is more shiny. And for this lighter gray color, if you want to use the same exact value, you can go to the hex and you can punch in a hex value of B3, B3, B3. So now we have kind of a shiny dark metal. Now I also want to put this noise texture into the normal to give it some bump. So let's take the factor here and we're going to put that into the normal. And then we actually need to convert this to normal data. So let's press Shift A. I'm going to go here to the search, and I'm going to search for the bump node. We're going to stick the bump node in between the noise texture and the principled shader. And then to convert the noise texture into normal data, we actually want to put the factor into the height value of the bump. Now it's way too bumpy, so we need to turn the strength way down so it's less bumpy. So I'm going to turn the strength value to a 0.02, just a 0.02. So if you zoom in here, you can see the metal is just slightly noisy. Now I also want to add another cool sci-fi texture to the metal. So to do this, I'm going to press Shift A. Let's go here to the search, and I'm going to search for the brick texture. Let's click on the brick texture, and I can drop it down here underneath the noise texture. And then I want to take the object coordinates, and let's also put that into the vector so it places the brick texture more evenly on the object. And then I can hold down the Control and Shift key and select the brick texture to actually preview what it's doing. Now I want to use another texture to distort the brick texture and make it look more sci-fi. So I'm going to press Shift A. Let's go here to the search, and I'm going to search for the Voronoi texture, and we're going to add the Voronoi texture, and I'm going to stick it in between the texture coordinate and the brick texture. And so because we're putting it through the vector, the Voronoi texture is going to distort the placement of the brick texture. And then there is a few settings that I want to change. So on the Voronoi texture, I'm going to click on the 3D, and I'm going to change it instead to 4D, and then I'm going to click on the F1 here, and I'm going to instead change it to F2. And then if I click right here on the bottom drop down, I want to change this to the Chebyshev, and that's going to give it like a cool sci-fi texture. You can see everything looks pretty blocky. But then I don't want to use the color here from the Voronoi. I instead want to use the distance. So let's unplug this, and I'm going to take the distance value and let's put that into the vector of the brick texture. And now we're getting this really cool sci-fi texture. Now on the brick texture, I'm going to leave all these values to the default, and also on the Voronoi, I'll leave all these values to the default. You could play around with them if you want to, but I want to leave them at the defaults. Although I do want to change the colors here of the brick texture. So let's click on color 1, and I'm going to make this a little bit darker. And then right here on color 2, I'm going to make this just a bit lighter, so it's kind of like a light gray. And then right here on this mortar here, I'm going to make this a bit lighter as well. So we basically have a light gray, a medium gray, and a dark gray. And if you want to use the same exact hex values, then on color 1 here, you can punch in a hex value of B2, B2, B2. And then here on color 2, you can punch in a hex value of 7F, 7F, 7F. And then here on the mortar, you can punch in a hex value of 595959 if you want to use the same values, or you can just kind of pick some gray colors. And then let's take the color here, and I'm going to put that into the base color of the principled shader. And then I can Control Shift and select the principled shader to preview it. And there we go. So you can now see we have that really cool sci-fi texture there on the metal. Now I also want to make the edges bump out a bit, and so I want to add the brick texture into the normal. So I'm going to click on this bump node right here, and I can press Shift D to duplicate it, and I'm going to stick it after the first bump. So the normal can go through the normal, but we now have this extra height value that we can add data into. So let's take the color here from the brick texture, and I can put that into the height. And then it's not very strong right now, so let's turn the strength value to like a 0.1. So now you can see it is a bit stronger. You could even turn that a little bit more up if you wanted to. I'm just going to leave it to a 0.1, but now you can see those edges look a little bit bumpy. So there we go. We now have a really cool procedural sci-fi metal. All right, so I just kind of hid the geometry node editor, but it's still right down here. So what I can do is just click right here, and I can drag this up, and I can make this bigger so we can preview the geometry nodes again. So I now want to make the emission material. So let's click on this set material node right here, and I'm going to press Shift D to duplicate it, and I want to put it right here after this icosphere. So this icosphere here is the slightly bigger icosphere, and it's the icosphere that you can see in the cracks. So I'm going to put the set material right there, but then I don't want to have the metal, so I'm going to click the X here to get rid of the metal. And then if I click and drag to make this a bit bigger, I also want to click on the X here to get rid of the metal, so we just can't see it in the view. So it's still going to be in the blend file, but we just can't see it here. And then I want to click on new here to add a new material. And then if I click here to rename this material, I can just rename it to glow. So then back here at the geometry nodes editor, I can click here on the set material, and I want to change this to glow. So this way we're telling this icosphere that it's going to be the glow material, and then the other geometry is going to be the metal. So I can now make this smaller, and we can now edit this glow material. So I'm going to click on the principled shader, and I can press X to delete it. Let's press Shift A, and I'm going to go here to the search, and I'm going to search for the emission shader. Let's click on the emission, and I'm going to put it there, and then I can put the emission into the surface. And so the emission is going to be emitting light. And then let's turn the strength up quite a bit. So I'm going to turn the strength value to like a 10, so it is much brighter. And now you can see that that bloom effect is starting to work. So we turned on the bloom effect in Blender Eevee. Right over here on the render properties, we turned on the bloom. And so the bloom is kind of going to give that glow effect. So I now want to add a texture in here because I want some parts to be one color and then other parts to be a slightly different color. So I'm going to press Shift A. Let's go here to the search, and I'm going to search for the noise texture. Let's click on the noise texture, and I can drop it here. And then with the noise texture selected, I can press Control T. That is going to add the texture coordinate and mapping, but I don't actually need the mapping, so I can click on it and I can press X to delete it. And then let's take the object here, and I'm going to put that into the vector of the noise texture. And then I want to take the noise texture, and I want to put the factor into the color. So the emission is going to be emitting the noise texture as its color. And then let's also take the scale here of the noise texture, and I'm going to turn that down to like a 3, so it is a bit smaller. So now I want to change the colors because you can see the glow is just very white. So to change the colors, I can press Shift A. Let's go here to the search, and I'm going to search for the color ramp, and let's drop the color ramp node right here after the noise texture. So I can now change these colors, and we can make different colors. So I'm going to first drag the black tab out and make it a bit more contrasty. And then I can click on the black tab here, and you can of course make this whatever color you want. I'm going to make this very bright, and then I'm going to make it a green color. And I think the green color works really well for the sci-fi orb. It kind of makes it look like an alien artifact or something like that. Although I do want to make the green color a little bit darker. And if you want to use the same hex value that I'm using, then you can go to the hex here and you can punch in 1B C600. And then I also want to click on the white tab right here, and I want to make this a green color as well. So let's click on the white tab here and click on the color, and I'm going to make this green as well, but this is going to be not quite as saturated, and it's going to be a bit more yellow. And if you want to use the same exact color for the lighter green, if you click here on the hex value, you can punch in 6AFF24. So that is the color that I'm using for the lighter green. So you can now see that we have some cool variations. So some parts are a little bit darker and other parts are a little bit lighter, but they're all that green color. And if you wanted to change the hue of the color, you could press Shift A. You can go here to the search and you can search for the hue saturation value node. And I'm going to put this node after the color ramp. And then you can just take the hue and you can play around with this. You can just drag it around and you can change it to any hue that you want. Or of course you can change the color ramp colors. Alright, and that is it for the materials and the modeling. So I can now close these windows. So what I can do is move my mouse over here when the crosshair appears, and I can click, drag over, and then let go to close that window. And then we also have the geometry node editor down here. So to close this, you can click and then drag down and let go to close that. So we are almost ready to animate this, but before we animate it, I do want to play around with the bloom settings. So let's make the side panel bigger here, and I'm going to go to the render properties, and in the render properties you can open up the bloom. So there's some different settings you can play around with. So I'm going to take this color here and I'm going to make this kind of a greenish color, and that way the bloom or the glow is going to be kind of green. And then also we can change this intensity here if we want to make it more intense. So I'm going to turn the intensity to like a 0.2 so it is more intense, but then it is way too big, so we can also turn the radius down if we want to make it smaller. So I'm going to just turn the radius value to like a 3, and also that intensity might be a little bit big, so I might turn this to like a 1.6 or maybe even just like a 1.5, something like that. And there we have it. So there is our procedural sci-fi alien orb. So we are now ready to animate this. Let's press Ctrl S to save, and I'm going to click and drag and bring up the timeline a little bit so we can see it. So to animate this, I'm first going to make sure I am on frame 1. So you can click right here to actually change this. You can click and drag. I'm going to make sure this is on frame 1. And then I also want Blender to automatically add keyframes. So I'm going to click right here to turn on the auto keying. And this way when we move the object, it'll automatically add keyframes. So I'm first going to make the glowing orb just kind of move up and down. So I can press G to grab, and then I can hit Z to bring it on the Z axis. And I'm going to bring that down a bit farther down just like that and place it there. And when I place that, you can see that on the timeline there's that little diamond right there, and the diamond is telling us that there's a keyframe there on frame 1. Now I want this to be a looping animation, so I need to have the keyframes be the same at the starting and end so that it can loop. And I am actually going to have this animation be a total of 500 frames. So right here on the end frame, I'm going to change this to 500 so that it's a total of 500 frames. Now you can click and drag right up here to bring this over here, and I want to go to frame 501. You can also click right here and actually just type in frame 501. Now it's very important that you go to frame 501, not frame 500, because if you add the same exact keyframe on frame 500, then where the animation is looping, there's going to be 2 frames where the animation looks exactly the same. So I'm going to change it to frame 501, and that way when it hits 500, it'll then go back to frame 1, and that'll make it a looping animation. So I now just want to add another keyframe exactly where this is. So I can just press the I key, and that's going to bring up the insert keyframe menu, and I want to insert location. So if I now drag back and forth here, you can see it's not moving at all, but we have a keyframe at 501, and we also have a keyframe at 1. So I now want to go into the very center of this, and so the very center of 1 and 500 is 250. So right here, I can actually just go here and type it in. So I'm going to type in 250, and then I want to add another keyframe because I want it to stay exactly where it is again. So I'm going to press the I key, and then I can insert location. So now at frame 1, frame 250, and frame 500, they're all the same keyframes. And so we're going to add more keyframes in between these keyframes to make it going up. And then that way it'll bob up and down. Now I also want to add another keyframe in between these two and another keyframe in between these two. So I've just brought up a basic calculator here on my computer. So what I want to do first is add a keyframe in between frame 1 and 250. So what I can do is I can actually just type in 250, and then I can divide this by 2. And so that is going to equal 125. And so if I go right here to the current frame, I'm going to type in frame 125. So now it's going to be right there in the center. And then with the object selected, I can press the I key, and let's insert location. So I now want to add another keyframe in between 250 and 500. And so what I can do is actually just times 125 by 3. And then that is going to equal 375. So we're timesing it by 1, 2, and then 3. So right here on the current frame, I can just change this to 375. And then again, just press the I key, and I can insert location. So now all of these 5 keyframes have the same amount of space in between them. So I now want to go in between each of the keyframes, and I want to add more keyframes to make the sphere going up, and then it will bob up and down. So the next keyframe after frame 1 is 125. So here in my calculator, I can type in 125, and then I want to divide this number by 2, and that is going to be 62.5. So what I can do here is I can just click on this, click on the value here, and I'm just going to change this to 62. So I can now animate this, so I can press G to grab, and then I can hit Z to bring it up on the Z axis, and I'm going to bring it up to about there. And because we had the auto key on, you can see it's automatically going to be adding a keyframe. So I now want to figure out what's in the middle of the next keyframes. So I can go 1, 2, 3. You can see I want to bring it over by 3. So I can take 62.5, and I'm going to times that by 3. And that is going to be 187. So right here on the current frame, I can change this to 187, and you can see again, it's going to be right there in the center of those 2 keyframes. And then what I want to do is I want to take this keyframe here, and I want to bring this over and put it right here. And this way it'll bob up and be at the same exact amount. So I can actually just click right here to select that diamond, and you can see the diamond is yellow because we have it selected. And I'm going to zoom in here a bit, just zoom into the timeline. So I can press Shift D to duplicate, and I'm going to bring this over, and I'm going to stick this right at frame 187. So now if I actually press the space bar to play this, I can click back here to go to frame 1. You can see it goes up and then it goes down, but then we need to continue to duplicate these keyframes. So we want to put one here in between these 2, and then another one here in between these 2. So I'm going to get rid of this value here, and I'm going to again go back here to 62.5 because 62.5 is the value in between these keyframes. And I want to bring this over by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I can just times this value by 5, and that's going to be 312. So right here on the current keyframe, I can go to frame 312, and then again, I want to click on this keyframe right here, the one that is yellow, and I'm going to press Shift D to duplicate it, and let's stick it right here at frame 312. So I now just need to do the same thing, but put it in between the last 2 keyframes. So again, I'm going to go back to 62.5, so I can type in 62.5, and I want to times this by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I'm just going to times this number by 7, and the answer is 437. So again, right here on the current frame, I can type in 437, and then again, click right here on this keyframe here, and I'm going to press Shift D to duplicate it, bring it over, and you can just zoom in and make sure it is at frame 437. So if I press the space bar to play, now you can see it's going to be a looping animation because it goes down and then it goes up, but it goes down right here at the end, and then it's down at the starting, so it'll be a looping animation. And it's going to be at the exact right speed because all the keyframes have the exact same amount of space in between them. Now, because this is going to be a looping animation, you might be wondering why I didn't just loop frame 1 to frame 125, because that is the loop. But I also want to spin this object, so I want to spin it on the z-axis, and so because I want to spin it, I need to make the entire animation much longer so that it can spin all the way around by 360 degrees. So let's now animate this object spinning around. So the easiest way to animate this is just by clicking over here to the object properties. And you can see that there are transform values here on the object properties. Now right now there are keyframes on the rotation, but I don't want to have any keyframes on the rotation right now. So I'm going to right click on the rotation values, and then I can click on clear keyframes. So now there isn't any keyframes on the rotation values. So then right here on the current frame, I want to change this to frame 1. And I now want to insert a keyframe here, and I want the rotation to be 0. So you can hover your mouse over the rotation values and press the I key, and that's going to insert a keyframe. Now again, I want this to be a looping animation, so I don't want to bring the timeline to 500, I want to bring it over to 501, and that way when it hits 500, it'll go back to 1, and it'll be a perfectly seamless looping animation. So right here on the current frame, make sure you set this to 501. And then I want to rotate the Z value, and I want to rotate it exactly by 360 degrees, so it rotates all the way around. So on frame 501, on the rotation Z, you can change this to 360, and then you can see it's automatically going to add a keyframe because we still have the auto key on. So I can now just play this, and you can see it's going to rotate. But there is a problem. You can see it starts to rotate faster, and then once we get to the end, it kind of rotates slower. And that is because on default, the keyframe interpolation is set to Bezier, so basically there's going to be a smooth transition between one keyframe to the next keyframe. But I want to change this, so this is actually really easy to change. So what I can do is bring my mouse right up here when the crosshair appears, and I can click and drag to split the window. And actually, we're not going to be adding any more keyframes, so I can click right here to turn off the auto key. So then right here in this new window, I want to change this to the graph editor, because we can use the graph editor to edit the keyframes. So if you click right here on the editor type, under animation, I can change this to the graph editor, and I can press the N key to close that side panel. So then right here on this side panel, if you click on these arrows here, you can see there's keyframes for all these values of the object. And I want to click on the Z rotation right here. So when you click on the Z rotation, if I hold down the control key and click with my middle mouse wheel, I can just make this smaller. And so this blue line right here is the keyframes for the Z rotation. And you can see right now it is very smooth because it kind of slopes over and then slopes up. So what I want to do is make it so that it is linear and make it so that it is straight. So I'm going to zoom in here, and I want to just select that keyframe right there. So you can see there's a bunch of keyframes on top of each other, so you can just continue to click right here to select it, and it's going to go between all of them, and just make sure you select that blue one. So it's this one right here, and it's the Z rotation. So I'm now going to zoom out here, and then I'm going to hold down the shift key and select the other keyframe here, which is at the very end. So we've selected the two handles for the Z rotation. I'm just pressing G to grab to move it around just so that I can see it, but then I can press the escape key to bring it back to its default position. So to make this linear, I can press the T key, and then I'm going to click on linear. So the default is the Bezier, that's what it is right now, but I want to change the keyframe interpolation to linear. And now you can see that line there is linear, and so it is very straight. So we don't need this anymore, so I can just click right up here when the crosshair appears, click and hold my mouse down, and drag over and let go to close that. So if I now press the space bar to play the timeline, you can see the rotation is moving at the same speed throughout the entire animation. Alright, so we are almost ready to render the animation, but I do also want to add a depth of field to kind of blur the background. So I'm going to hold down the Z button and move my mouse back to the solid view, and I'm going to press Shift A, And I'm going to go right down here and add an empty, and I can just add the plane axis. Now the empty objects, you can't actually see them in the render because they don't actually have any visible faces, and so we can actually tell the camera to focus on where this object is, but you won't actually see it in the render. So I'm going to bring the empty over here, and then I can scale it down and just kind of stick it here kind of on the surface of that orb. So that is a good spot. So now if I click on the camera right here, I can click right over here to go to the object data properties, and I want to click on the depth of field just to turn on the depth of field. Now here on the focus object, I want to tell the camera what it's going to focus on. So if I click on this, I just want to select the empty object. So now the depth of field will focus on the empty. So I can press the 0 on the numpad to go into the camera view, and I can hold down the Z button and go up into the rendered view. And then if you change the f-stop right here, that is going to change the strength of the depth of field. So I want to turn the f-stop to a 0.5. I think a 0.5 looks pretty good. I do like a somewhat stronger depth of field, but you could turn this up to like 1 if you wanted to. I'm going to turn this to a 0.5. So now the background is a bit blurred, and even the kind of back area, the back parts of the icosphere is a little bit blurred. So we're now going to render this to frames, and then we can compile it together in Blender's video editor. So let's click right here to go to the output properties, and we want to set an output for the rendered images. So right here on the output, let's click on this file icon. And then in the folder with all of my other tutorial files, I've created a new folder called rendered frames. You can click on the plus icon right there to make a new folder, and I'm just going to go inside the folder, and then I'm going to click on the accept button. And so this way, all of the frames are going to be rendered to that folder. And then it is going to be a lot of frames. It is going to be 500 frames. So to make the image size a little bit smaller, here on the file format, I'm just going to change this to JPEG instead of PNG. But then to make sure the quality is still very high, I can turn the quality here to 100. So I can now press Ctrl S again to save the Blender file, and then to render out all the frames, you can click on Render, and you can click on Render Animation. And if it's taking your computer a very long time to render out all the frames and you want it to render faster, there are a few things you can do. So you can turn down the resolution, and if you turn down the resolution, the image size will be smaller, and so it will render faster. Another thing you can do is you can go to the render properties, and you can see the Eevee actually does have samples. So if you want to render much faster, you could turn the render samples way down, maybe just turn it to like a 5 or a 10, and it will render much faster. I want it to be very high quality, so I will leave it at the default of 64. So I will just click on render and render animation. And the render finished. So I'm just going to press Ctrl S again to save the Blender file, and then let's open up a new video editing file. So I can click right here on File, and I'm going to go here to New, and I'm going to go down here and add Video Editing. So then right down here in the sequencer, I'm going to press Shift-A, and let's go to Image Sequence. And then you can just locate to the folder where you saved all the rendered frames. And one important thing that I need to do is click right here on the display settings, and I'm going to click on the sort by name. And this way you can see now it's going to be sorted by their names. So we have 001, 002, and so on. And also if it's going backwards, you can click right here and you can click on reverse sorting, but I don't need to do that because I want it to start as 1 and then go down. Now to add in all the frames, you can press the A key, that'll select all the frames in that folder, and then I can click on Add Image Strip. So I can now press the space bar to play, and we can watch that. Now I need to set this to the correct resolution, so I render this out as 2560 by 2560, so I'm just going to change the resolution to the resolution that I rendered it as. You can also just click right here on the strip, and then you can click here on strip, and then you can click on set render size. And when you do that, it's also going to scale it up and make sure it's the correct size. So you can press the space bar to play the animation. And then right here on the end, I need to change the end to 500 because our total animation was 500 frames. You can see that it is a perfectly seamless looping animation, so that's really great. So we can now add in those sound effects. So I'm going to press Shift-A, and let's click right here on sound. And then I'm going to be adding the first sound effect in here. So this is going to be the Alien Hum 6, and I can click on Add Image Strip. And then I'm going to click on the display waveform so we can actually see it. And then right here on the volume of the Alien Hum, I want to make this louder, so I'm going to turn the volume up to like 4. And then I want to bring this audio over here to the starting. So I'm going to zoom in here, click with my middle mouse wheel and bring this over. And then I can press G to grab, and I'm going to bring this over to the starting frame. And then I'm going to zoom out and click with my mouse wheel and bring this over here. And I'm going to press Shift D to duplicate this. And let's bring the other sound effect here. And I'm going to zoom in and press G to grab and stick it right down there at the end. And why I'm putting it at the very starting and the very ending is so that it'll be a looping animation. And the sound effects will loop as well. Now I also need to add some sound effects here in the center. So I just need to fill this area. So I'm going to press Shift D to duplicate, and I'm going to bring this to about there. And I'm just going to bring it kind of in the center here. And in the video, you won't actually be able to hear the sound effects because with OBS, the screen recording software, I have the audio turned off, but you can see that it just will hum and then hum and then hum. And then I want this strip to end here. So I can click right here on the handle and press G to grab, and I'm going to move this over there. All right, so I now just want to add one more sound effect. So I'm going to press Shift A. Let's click on sound. And then the other one that I'm going to be adding is the force field ambient. So again, links in the description if you'd like to download this from freesound.org, and I can click on add sound. And then this one, I also want to click on display waveform so I can see the waveform, but this one is quite a bit louder and I do want to make it more subtle. So right here on the volume, I can just turn this to like a 0.3. And I can press G to grab, and I can just bring this over, and I'm going to bring this over to the very starting. So now if I play through that, it'll actually sound like a looping animation. And this sound effect is very loopable as well. So when you go to the end, it'll actually sound like it is looping. All right, so that is really it. So I can now just render this to a final video. So if you go right over here to the output properties, I'm going to scroll down here, and I'm going to click right here on this file icon to set an output. And I will just save this as final video, just rename it to final video or whatever you want to rename it. And I'll just save this in a folder with my other files, and I can click on accept. And then I'm going to go right here to the file format, and I'm going to use FFmpeg video. And then right here on the encoding, if you open this up, I'm going to be using a container of MPEG-4. And then on the video codec, I will use H.264 and the output quality, medium quality, and the encoding speed to good. And then right here on the audio, I will be using the audio codec of AAC. So then of course you can save this Blender file, save the video editing file, and then to render this, you can click on render and render the animation. So there we have it. There is the Sci-Fi alien orb looping animation with geometry nodes. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and thank you so much for watching. And if you'd like to help support this channel, you can purchase the tutorial files on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page with the links in the description. And also checking out my Gumroad store and Patreon page and the YouTube memberships are all great ways to help support this channel. And if you enjoyed this video and you'd like to send me a little tip, you can also use the super thanks feature here on YouTube, and I do appreciate your support. But I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and thank you for watching.